Alright, welcome back to my channel. How are you guys doing? This is your very first brand spanking new time here. Oh shit. Today we're gonna be doing the usual rundown of everything that I read in the previous month, and that previous month is March Madness. I got through kind of a weird selection of books. As per usual, we're just going to talk about them. We're just going to get right into it as well. So let's start with these books because these are all part of a series. I have embarked on the Shatter Me series. How's it going? Well, I'm not going to really tell you too many of my thoughts because I am filming a whole Shatter Me vlog about every single book in the series. It's going to be really long and I'm losing my mind a little bit over the series, but I'm also sometimes having a really good time and sometimes having a really bad time. So if you don't know, let me just hold up Unravel Me because this cover, editing this, I will blind myself. The Shatter Me series by Tahereh Mafi it's kind of like an OG dystopian YA. Back in my day, I read the first three because at first there were only 3 novels, Shatter Me, Unravel Me, and Ignite Me. But then a few years later, Tahereh Mafi was like, you know what, I can't leave the story there, even like the story technically does wrap up in the third one, and so she released 3 other books plus novellas to go almost in between every single book. So I also read Unite Me, which is 2 novellas. So there's an obscene amount of books in this series now. Like, it's a little crazy. And I'm going on the journey. So what does the journey entail? We follow Juliet, who has damaged, traumatized. She's going through a lot. She's going through a hell of a lot, as she is. She is one of the most annoying protagonists that I have ever had the displeasure of following. I'm really sorry. I sympathize with her. I relate to her a lot. But God, she is so annoying and whiny and cringy, and at times really stupid. Maybe that's not really fair of me because Juliet has grown up for most of her life in an asylum or being bumped around, getting sent different places by her abusive parents, because in this dystopian world, which has been taken over by this new government, this new ultra government, which rules the whole entire world, all of the continents, called the Reestablishment, Juliet has powers. Her touch is lethal. So if she touches you, you experience like blinding pain, sometimes to the point of death. She has been thrown in an asylum where she's been at the start of the first book for like, how many days? 264 days. Okay, you know what? That's not even that, not me saying that's not even that bad, but I always think she's been in there for so much longer. Yeah, okay, wait. Okay, anyway, I thought she was in the asylum for a lot longer, but turns out it was less than a year. So she's been thrown in there because her touch is lethal and she hasn't been able to control it, and everyone thinks she's a monster, she's a freak. So she thinks she is just the most awful person. She blames herself for a lot. And one day when this guy named Adam gets thrown in as her cellmate, she starts to learn more about the world outside, what's going on. Eventually she is taken out of the asylum by the Reestablishment, who proposes that they want to use her as a weapon to torture information out of people, because the Reestablishment is not a good organization, not really the government that you want. Essentially they just lied to get in power, and then they have not fulfilled any of their promises. So very realistic. Basically all of the civilians are just trapped, malnourished, mistreated all across the world because this group of people are like ultra rich. They've taken all the resources for themselves, and when Juliet gets taken by them, she's like, I'm obviously not going to work for you. You guys are monsters. But there's a really handsome monster. This man is scrumptious. I can't lie to you. She starts to learn more about like what's going on, what he wants, because he is the leader of one of the sectors of North America. So yeah, the writing isn't great. Okay, the writing is the goddamn worst, especially in the first one, to the point where it's so funny. You will hear about it extensively to the point of death in these vlogs. I laugh every single time. It's really bad. My favorite quote, I've already shared this with you on Goodreads, but he's wrong. He's so wrong. He's more wrong than an upside down rainbow. So how wrong is that exactly? Anyway, so I have a love-hate relationship with this series. I am glad that I'm reading it all the way through because I have never finished the series all the way through. So I got through 4 of the Shatter Me novels in March. I'm excited to see the growth between the first era, if you will, and then Daramafi's like second installment in the rest of the series. So that is Shatter Me. I have some university reads that I am very happy to recommend you. The first of those is Gun Island by Amitav Ghosh. I'm actually about to sit down and write an essay on this today, so I'm going to be working a bit more closely with this book, but this is really, really good. This was for my ecology course. Essentially, so much going on in this book. So much. I gave it 4 stars, but we're following our protagonist named Dean, and he is a rare book seller. He's a merchant of old books. He lives in Brooklyn, and he just tries to sell these like really cool antique rare old books. On a trip back to Kolkata, where he's going to see some relatives, do some different stuff, one of his distant relatives comes up to him and he's like, yo, I know you did your PhD on this legend, but I have some information about something that could be related, might be related, someone called the Gun Merchant. There's like a shrine to them out in the Sundarbans, and maybe you should go check it out because you've kind of been interested in that your whole life. Dean is very not adventurous. He's very cocooned, very wrapped up, very happy in the modern world, not really thinking too much about climate change. This is a book very much focused on the changing climate, the changing world, humanity's influence on the earth, the consequences of not attuning yourself to what is going on. We follow Dean's walls being broken down as he goes to the Sundarbans. He eventually does go to see the shrine. He meets different people there, studying things like dolphins, history. There's a lot about snakes in this book. So many snakes. I lost count of the number of snakes that this man met. But through all of this, you follow him chasing the legend of this gun merchant and trying to figure out like what is its historical basis, where does it come from, does it have any nugget of truth in it, and he starts to find out, kind of starts to live the legend a little bit. Follow him like finding so many different connections. It's academic, it's suspense, has a thrillery flavor. Is that even how I want to say it? Not really. What does the back call it? A climate change like action adventure. Very interesting. I've never really read a book like this. My only critique, and I did have a few actually, so not my only critique, but I didn't love the writing, but the story was very engaging because it was almost like it is a mystery, but it's a mystery that Dean starts to live himself. It's about the circulation, the revolution, the wheel of stories. Why do certain stories get told at certain times? How do they get revived? When they go through a period of revival, what are the people who are telling that story going through themselves? Very, 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 very cool. But also I didn't really love the characters. I didn't find a lot of people in here really ringing true in terms of their dialogue. I didn't find the dialogue in here very believable. I really did not like the way that people talked because it just felt really weird to me. On a whole, I obviously found so much to talk about. I'm so excited to start my essay today. It's actually going to be on the relationship between viruses and storytelling, or like storytelling as a virus, or why stories are represented as like viruses, maladies, bacteria in Gun Island, which is really, 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 really cool. If you're interested in like the climate, myths, legends, the like anatomy and like the life cycle of a story, really, 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 really interesting. I loved it. I loved it so much, and I learned a ton. Like there's so much to learn here. We bop back and forth from the Sundarbans, which are a group of islands between India and Bangladesh. There's also a lot in here about refugees, people migrating mostly because of climate change, political upheaval, a lot of that political upheaval caused by climate change, lack of resources, etc. But like I said, we go back and forth from India, Bangladesh, Venice, California, New York. It's just, yeah, it's global. It's very cool, and I would highly recommend. I'm like out of breath talking about this one. Actually, this kind of felt like what Dan Brown would do if Dan Brown were a little bit more literary and more concerned with ecology. Let's bounce over to a series that I finished. You'll be very proud of me because I finished, is this the first series I finished this year? I don't know, but I finally finished Crossblood. Who is this by? I think this is by Ellie Blake. I have been reading this series for like 3 years now. 1 book per year. I gotta stop doing this. Can we promise to each other to stop doing this? So I finally finished Nightblood, which is the last book in the trilogy. This is a young adult fantasy, and I'm actually considering purchasing the whole trilogy. I kind of enjoyed it that much. My favorite's still book number 1 though, so I might just purchase book number 1. But I listened to all of these on audiobook. I did really enjoy the audiobooks, and this is, I think I say this every time, but it's a very extremely basic copy and paste reiteration of young adult fantasy. But I like it so much because, first of all, it deals with frost and snow and ice and winter, and I really enjoy that. But also I think it really does the elements of YA really well. I think it's pretty stable, able to take care of itself. It's not going to slap you across the face with sloppy writing or stakes that aren't high enough, or characters that you don't fall in love with, because I actually really liked all of the characters in here. We principally follow Ruby. She is a fireblood in Sudesia. I think it's Sudesia, where she lives. Firebloods are kind of being hunted and unfortunately rounded up and taken to the evil Frost King's court because he's going to put them all together in a battle to duke it out, fight each other in the Colosseum for entertainment. So Ruby has been living kind of in the snowy mountains with her mother, like hiding that she runs hot, that she has this firepower, and just like trying to quell it down, you know? Unfortunately, one night it does get out that her and her mother are firebloods. Her mother is killed in front of her, and Ruby is taken away to the Frost King's dungeon to eventually compete in the trials. She's there for a little bit. It's not a good time, but eventually she's broken out by this monk and this mysterious hooded man and they take her away to a monastery where she finds out that there's like a resistance of both firebloods and frostbloods who want to overthrow the evil king Rasmus. The story really expands from there. There's a lot of identity crisis, identity unveiling going on, but with any good fantasy as well, there's a background, a lore, a religious side, like the gods, and different stories that are told that we find out aren't really just stories. And I think Frostblood, the series, really did it well. I was really interested in that backstory, whereas a lot of fantasy books I find that I don't really care about kind of the mythos of the world, if you will, especially when it comes into the present and we find out that it's not just legends and stories, that it's like a real thing that people have kind of forgotten to engage with. But in Frostblood, I think it was really well done. I love the relationship. I love the banter. I really did like the romance in here. It's funny. I just found it really compelling, and I really got into the first one. If you are looking for just your absolutely standard run-of-the-mill book, but I think like those are so important, so valuable, especially when they are done right, Frostblood is probably the one for you. So I finished the series. I feel good about it. I would probably rank them in terms of enjoyment, like the way that they stand. I don't think they get better, unfortunately. The first book just really stood out to me, but I finished Nightblood. So that is another series checked off my list. I say another as if I have checked any other series off my list in a long time, which I haven't. Then I read a book that I thought was going to be a 5-star prediction. I thought it was going to be a 5-star. And I'm still like a little confused why it wasn't. And that is Swaroop's Latitudes of Longing. This one hurts a little bit that I didn't rate it higher than I did, because I really thought, first of all, gorgeous. I really thought this was going to be one of my favorite books of the year, and it just wasn't. I'm so upset. Still solid. I still gave it 3.5 stars, which is great, but it just wasn't the 5-star gem that I was expecting. So Latitudes of Longing. Oh my god, how do I even describe it? This one's really hard to talk about. So first of all, this was a gift from Arca. Thank you so much if you are still watching. I know you sent this to me a while ago, but I finally got around to it. First of all, it is a love letter to the Hindu concept of oneness, where everything is one, nothing is inseparable from anything else, everything is connected. Love that. It begins with a really compelling story. I didn't know that this book was split into kind of short stories, even though they are very much connected, because each story follows someone who was present in the previous story. So the book opens with this newly married couple living on the Andaman Islands. He is a scientist and he studies trees, and he has married this woman who talks to trees. Their story was probably the best one, and I've seen a couple people commenting that like they loved this first story so much, set on the islands, and then everything else after that they were just like, oh, because they wanted this story to continue. And that's what I wanted as well. Really got the impression reading this first story of like them just getting married, them getting to know each other, them like staying in this house, him dealing with her oddities, but also her dealing with his oddities. It was just really charming, very compelling, and I really got attached to these characters. She can also see ghosts and speak to them, and it's just really about like their struggle, but also ultimately respect for each other, because he's very scientific, she's obviously clairvoyant, she talks to trees, she's very much of the natural world, and like she just sees things that he can or refuses to. And especially in this first story, it really reminded me, the voice was really reminding me of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's writing. Unfortunately that kind of slipped away, and I think maybe the book, I don't know if it tried to do too much, but it really seemed like it was trying to do too much. Most of the story as well is set so much around nature, so much, because we jump from the islands, the Andaman Islands, and eventually we make it all the way to Nepal, to Nepal's capital, Kathmandu, and to the huge mountains of Everest and K2. What it is about as well is like people coming to terms with the land that they're living on, realizing that continents are islands, islands are mountains. What is on the very top, the peak of Everest? Seashells. It's the ocean, because it's risen, you know, it's risen up, and it's the islands like building themselves up. So Latitudes of Longing to me refers to like the top peak of mountains that are so nostalgic for the ocean floor, and then the ocean floor in cases of island building like rising up to get to the sky. Both latitudes like want to, maybe they want to meet, maybe they just want to get to where they're going or get back to where they've been. The stories stop before you really get a chance to really get into them too much. So the first story deals a lot with the history of the islands, the history of India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Burma, Myanmar. Book scope was like, whoa, huge, absolutely huge, which makes sense for the concept of oneness, but I think as a novel it sometimes was a little bit difficult to get into, especially because I'm not a fan of that short story format, although it is very much like it's not a short story, it's a story that just continues, and that is the whole point of it. The second story follows this mother trying to break her son out of prison. Throughout all this though, we also have what the back calls the ghost of an evaporated ocean as restless as the continents, which like I really like the idea of this ocean that is no longer obviously an ocean, it's been dried up, but like the spirit of that ocean is still so present and haunting. But ultimately I actually found myself not loving the writing. I didn't tab any quotes, anything like that, and I think ultimately that's a pretty good indicator of how much I enjoyed something. So I would recommend, because I think maybe it was just me. I want my coffee. Okay, then I read Winter in Sokcho. This was good. I keep thinking about this one. This was really good. I gave this 4 stars. Really enjoyed this. Okay, so this follows a young woman in Sokcho, which is a border city between North and South Korea. So there's a lot going on about the war, how the war is still going on, but people don't really act like it's going on. Our protagonist voices a lot of just struggle with that, with a war that's been forgotten, with like signs of the war that is still happening, but people kind of act like it's not there. And there is so much in this book about like what remains unspoken, what people don't talk about, what is like happening in everyday life, but you just kind of act like it's all fine or normal, or you just kind of disregard it. So she is working as kind of the everything person for this small seaside resort, because Sokcho is pretty famous for its beaches, for its hotels, and people go there in the summer. However, this book is winter. She is living her life there. She has a boyfriend, but it's not really serious for her. He is content to kind of go away to Seoul and try to become a model. She doesn't really want that life for herself, and amidst all this are like huge struggle and pressure from her mother to get surgery. It doesn't help that at the hotel where she works there is another young girl staying, like getting away, like very much isolating herself because she's covered in bandages from a recent surgery, and so she doesn't want anyone to see her until she has like transformed. Amidst the fish-filled kind of low time of this town, there arrives this man from France, and he is an illustrator. He's working on the last book in like his comic series, and he's looking for inspiration because I guess he kind of travels the world going to different isolated places and making it the setting for his hero in his comic book. They strike up a very uneasy relationship. Our protagonist is also Korean and French. Her father is not in the picture, but her father is from France, and so when this man arrives from Normandy, it starts to pull up and like strike up all of these different memories, different feelings. She has this sudden pull to go and see France herself. At the same time, this like huge yearning just to be seen, like really to be seen, and it's just such a frustrating little book because she just so much wants to be seen. There's so much about the eyes and ears, so much about looking, so much about witnessing, so much about people, like I said, not looking, not witnessing. In the course of the relationship, she's like, why don't you ever draw me? Why are there no women in your stories? Like, where are they? And again, it's just like this image of like perfection, because he's like, I can't draw someone unless she's perfect, unless she's like the everything woman. There is so much packed into this book, but it never feels like too much. It feels very natural. The author feels very much in command of her voice, of her talent, and it's really good. It's really unsettling, very short, very subtle, very quiet, very blunt, but like so creeping, like a little fish crawling up on the beach, and you're like, what are you doing there? That's really weird. Also a lot about eating disorders, the way that she sees herself, the way that she sees her body. Her body is scarred. She has this scar, I think on her stomach, that she's very uncomfortable about, and it very much mirrors the way that the land is currently scarred by the war. There is this piece of barbed wire fence that is mentioned a bunch in this book, like running down the beach. She very much identifies with the landscape, and it's just, I don't know, it just became such a special little book, so I gave this 4 stars. I would really recommend, and you can read this in like next to no time. I cannot wait to read this again. I really cannot wait to read this again. To finish up this month, I had 2 other books. The first one was a dud, unfortunately, and that is the Vermillion Emporium by Jamie Paxton. I gave this 2.5 stars. I really have not had that many misses this year, which is great, but the Vermillion Emporium, Vermillion Emporium was bleh. It was bleh, unfortunately. It was a young adult fantasy that did not stand out. Oh my god. One of the most boring fantasies I've ever read. It pitched itself as a mix of the Radium Girls and Howl's Moving Castle, and it really did not deliver on any single front. So boring. I feel like I cannot forgive fantasy books that are just one plot line hammered down. Like, I feel like if you're a fantasy novel, unless you do it really well, you need to have subplots. You need to have subplots. You can't just be doing the same thing the whole book, and that's what the Vermillion Emporium became. People doing the same thing for the whole book, to the point where it was just so tedious, so get me out of here. I should have DNF'd it, you guys. This is about Twain and Quinta. They meet each other. They're strangers and they fall in love. I also hated never have I ever hated, I don't know, a romance as much as this. It was just fluffy to the point where I wanted to gag. Sometimes I enjoy fluffy romances, but this one I was just like, oh my god. It's like they meet each other and suddenly everything is just sunshine and rainbows. They're both trying to kind of work their way towards a better life in Sevron, which is the town that they live in, and they're trying to do so because they found starlight. And for so long, people have been like, what is starlight? Like, how can we make use of it? And Quinta and Twain are the ones who discover how to weave it into clothes that give you power. Because Quinta has a book that basically tells you like the different patterns that you need to weave or sew to create things like joy, to create a salve for heartbreak, to make you more beautiful, anything you want basically. You can weave it from starlight, put it on, and you will have these powers. This whole book became, like for half of it, I want to say, maybe, is them trying to figure out how to weave starlight. I have complaint after complaint, but I'm not even going to spend any time talking about it. So that's the Vermillion Emporium. I just want to forget about it. And then the last book I read, because I'm on 4% battery, was also for school, and that is Earth Elder Stories told by Alexander Wolf. So Alexander Wolf has taken his family's stories that were orally told, and he has put them down into print. I read this for my Indigenous Lit course, and essentially they are just a bunch of stories from his family. Yeah, I feel like I learned so much. We're still on this unit in my class as well, so I think I should be able to write about these pretty soon. Just honestly really enjoyed my time with this. So obviously not a book to rate or anything like that, but really enjoyed reading this. And the introduction and preface as well is very nice and lengthy and has a lot of information. So that is Earth Elder Stories. So that is the first book for that class. Done. So that is that guy. But that is everything I read in March. Feel free to leave me a little, are there like blueberry or blueberry emojis? I'm feeling very blueberry today. Leave me a little blueberry, or like leave me your favorite fruit emoji maybe instead. So until my next video, that is when I will see you. So ciao.